When Donald Trump was kicked off social media in 2021, liberal pundit Matthew Iglesias tweeted, "It's kind of weird that just completely worked with no visible downside whatsoever." 2 years later, Fox News fired Tucker Carlson.
Deplatforming works, and it is important. There you go. Good things can happen. I also kind of feel like I'm waiting for the villain's hand to reemerge.
As it turns out, every major star gets a sequel. Trump is back in the White House, and Tucker has a bigger audience than ever before. What we've learned is that deplatforming doesn't work. In 2021, I published a video at Reason predicting that it would backfire, comparing the media ecosystem to Freud's theory of the unconscious. When thoughts or experiences are repressed, they inevitably resurface in more deranged and damaging forms. When our dominant communication platforms seek to repress widely held beliefs and opinions, those beliefs and opinions aren't likely to simply disappear, but rather reemerge elsewhere.
White people are every single bit justified in being racist.
Brigitte Macron has a penis. I really want you to know that.
Brigitte Macron does not have a penis.
Brigitte Macron has a penis.
No, she doesn't.
I'm sorry.
Kill those motherfuckers and murder those motherfuckers in the street. Let the streets soak in their fucking red capitalist bloods, dude.
What we've learned is that the only way to exorcise our demons is to confront them head on. I get why progressives thought they'd won the platform wars in the early 2020s. Remember when Amazon Web Services deplatformed Parler, the right-wing social media network? Remember when Twitter and Facebook blocked a completely accurate New York Post story about Hunter Biden's laptop? Remember when the New York Times' Kevin Roose wanted Biden to appoint a reality czar? And for a moment it looked like that was actually going to happen. Remember when scientists from elite institutions were shadow banned for expressing opinions about COVID that turned out to be correct? Remember when the Stanford economist and physician Jay Bhattacharya had his Twitter account secretly throttled for, among other things, saying that the lockdowns were counterproductive? Back then, things were looking pretty bleak for those of us who still subscribe to John Perry Barlow's 1996 vision of the internet as a place where anyone, anywhere may express his or her beliefs, no matter how singular, without fear of being coerced or silenced into conformity. And then, 3 years ago, Elon Musk bought Twitter and changed everything.
Free speech is only relevant if you allow people you don't like to say things you don't like.
Musk invited journalists to examine the Twitter files, exposing how the federal government had coerced private companies to suppress critical speech. That's how we learned that Jay Bhattacharya's Twitter account had been secretly throttled. The NIH director, Francis Collins, had called Bhattacharya a fringe epidemiologist, requesting a quick and devastating takedown of his heretical views.
I had been placed on this blacklist the day I joined Twitter in 2021.
Bhattacharya ended up taking Collins' job as the director of the NIH.
And then you see the villain's hand reemerge.
Musk replaced Twitter's third-party establishment sources serving as fact-checkers with the community writ large. When President Biden tweeted that the 28th Amendment is the law of the land, a community note was appended observing that the 28th Amendment doesn't exist. The New York Post was no longer suppressed by Twitter, but it did get a community note on a fake Bigfoot video. The success of this crowdsourced approach to fact-checking inspired Mark Zuckerberg to adopt a similar system.
I was really worried from the beginning about basically becoming this sort of decider of what is true in the world, right? That's kind of a crazy position to be in for billions of people using your service.
Community Notes is a 21st century instantiation of John Stuart Mill's concept of a marketplace of ideas, where thinkers clash, compete, and arrive at a consensus. It's a superior method for getting at the truth to simply trusting the authority of institutional gatekeepers.
And when people usually disagree on something, tend to agree on how they're voting on a note, that's a good sign to the community that there's actually a broad consensus on this, and then you show it.
The vibe shift was real, and it was marvelous. Banned accounts were reinstated. A different type of content began to dominate X's For You algorithm. And people started to say what they really think.
A shock occurs, and an equilibrium that involves a great deal of preference falsification unravels. That's when we have a preference cascade.
In his 1995 book, Private Truths, Public Lies, Duke political scientist Timur Kuran introduced the concept of preference falsification, where individuals tend to suppress their unpopular beliefs to avoid negative social consequences. As fewer people express them, these private truths become even more forbidden, and many people end up convincing themselves to believe in the public lies.
It's the misrepresentation of our wants in the interest of improving our reputation, avoid being stigmatized, to avoid being excluded.
Quran cites Václav Havel's essay, The Power of the Powerless, which tells the story of a greengrocer who puts a sign in his window that says, "Workers of the world unite" in communist Czechoslovakia, not because he believed the slogan, but to remain in harmony with society.
That exemplifies performative ritual. It signals to some powerful entity that at least you're going to play along, even if you have some doubts.
But every once in a while, a shock to the system allows for widely held but suppressed beliefs to break through, resulting in a preference cascade.
A classic case is what followed the breaching of the Berlin Wall. Millions of East Germans, they were paying lip service to the idea that the communist world was outpacing the free world. And when enough people felt free enough to express themselves truthfully, huge numbers of others followed.
For instance, when Musk made likes on X private, the public lies receded and people's real preferences started to surface.
That has made preferences expressed on X to be more authentic.
When progressives, including AOC, quietly removed the pronouns in their social media bios, it was kind of like the greengrocer pulling down his sign.
Pronoun use is a performative ritual. It is essentially signaling that you're fine with the woke agenda and you are going to go along with it.
The free and open internet was back. Governments of the industrial world, leave us alone, wrote John Perry Barlow. I declare the global social space we are building to be naturally independent of the tyrannies you seek to impose upon us. Barlow prophesied that when anyone anywhere may express his beliefs, it would lead to a more humane world. That may be true, but free speech also means tolerating the ugly side of humanity.
Jews are running society. Women need to shut the fuck up. Blacks need to be imprisoned for the most part. And we would live in paradise. It's that simple.
Nick Fuentes is an unapologetic white nationalist and anti-Semite who mocks the Holocaust and has called for Jewish Americans and so-called occultists to be executed.
There is an occult element at the high levels of society, and specifically among the Jews. When we take power, they need to be given the death penalty. Straight up. This is God's country. This is Jesus's country. This is not the domain of atheists or devil worshippers or perfidious Jews.
Tucker Carlson invited Fuentes on his podcast.
What I do think is bad, just objectively bad and destructive, is the all Jews are guilty or all anybody is guilty of anything, because that's just like not true. And we don't believe that as Christians.
I guess here's my substantive disagreement, because as a Catholic, I could not agree more with you.
Yes.
In what you're saying. I love all people, even the ones that don't like us. We have to love them all, and we have to recognize that
we're required to.
Yes. And especially Aquinas says the Jews are a witness people, and so they actually have special protections under the law, according to Catholic philosophy. But I guess my substantive disagreement, which I've said on the show also, is the idea that neoconservatism and Israel has nothing to do with Jewishness, Jewish identity, the Jewish religion, because clearly the state of Israel and the neocons are deeply motivated by that ethnic identity, and their allegiance to Israel proceeds from that. You say identity politics like it's a bad thing. I think identity is a reality.
The comedian and podcaster Dave Smith, who happens to be Jewish, did his own friendly sit-down with Fuentes, later commiserating with Carlson about how the critics had ignored the positive moments in their interviews.
They aren't circulating the clips where Nick, on my podcast, explicitly rejected racial hatred. On your podcast, when he agreed with you that Christians can't believe in collective guilt. People don't want, Ben Shapiro's not clipping that for his show today for the greatest hits. No, they're going back to all the worst things he said. And I think this should tell all of us something. They actually prefer that. Well, they prefer that he be a neo-Nazi so that they can attach him to you, so that they can argue to cancel you and argue that you're not a part of this GOP coalition. If he is maturing and he is clarifying or moderating, isn't it something that they all are allergic to that?
In the old days, YouTube would have pulled these interviews down. Instead, they've got a combined 8.4 million views and counting. When conservatives criticized Carlson for his softball interview, Heritage Foundation President Kevin Roberts appealed to their tribal loyalty.
The American people expect us to be focusing on our political adversaries on the left, not attacking our friends on the right.
The Heritage Foundation's board of trustees and staff went into open revolt. Roberts ended up firing his chief of staff and apologizing at an all-staff meeting.
I made a mistake, and I let you down. And I let down this institution. And I am sorry for that.
You have to expunge all anti-Semitism, all of it.
Senior research fellow Robert Rector, a 47-year veteran of Heritage, advised his boss to emulate William F. Buckley Jr.
But that's just part of it. The other is you have to expel the lunatics.
In 1962, Buckley, who was the founder and editor-in-chief of National Review, booted the John Birch Society from the modern conservative movement. Buckley made his decision after the John Birch Society's founder, Robert Welch, theorized that communist influences completely controlled President Eisenhower, whom he accused of treason, and that former World War II General and Defense Secretary George C. Marshall was a dedicated agent of the Soviet conspiracy who'd facilitated the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Buckley denounced Welch and the Birchers as far removed from common sense and worked to marginalize them for embarrassing the broader conservative movement with their unhinged pamphlets and for disrupting town halls, school board meetings, and Republican events. In 1962, magazine editors like Buckley were gatekeepers to the public. On today's open internet, neither Roberts nor any other conservative leader has that kind of power. That's why Fuentes continues to grow in influence, and his supporters, the Groypers, continue haunting conservative events and heckling major figures like Glenn Beck for their support of Israel.
We're lobbying everybody else, and they will...
There's no Bill Buckley to police the right any longer in the digital age. But another episode in which the public face of American conservatism acted as gatekeeper can help us to understand the hazards of deplatforming and why we should be thankful that cancellation is no longer so easy. Like Kevin Roberts from Heritage, Buckley had to contend with anti-Semitism. In the 1980s, National Review writer Joe Sobran's columns called Israel the most powerful lobby in America, and he praised a little magazine published by a white supremacist as the only one that faces the hard facts about race, though he later clarified that he wasn't endorsing outright racism. The neocon power couple, Norman Podhoretz and Midge Decter, accused Sobran of anti-Semitism in his critique of Israel, which Sobran says was just a tactic to silence him.
I criticize all kinds of special interest lobbies, as most conservatives do. The difference is that I've taken on several ethnic lobbies in ways others don't like to, the black and Jewish ones in particular. Also the gay ones and the feminist ones. Now, as soon as you start doing that, you open yourself up to a kind of ad hominem argument that's still legitimate for some reason. You're called an anti-Semite, or you're called a racist, or a homophobe, or a male chauvinist, or sexist.
Buckley cut ties with Sobran in 1993 after he blamed Israel for America's entanglement in the Gulf War.
It's been especially painful to me as a conservative to find so many of my fellow conservatives joining in the frightening war hysteria and hype.
Sobran said Buckley tried to portray him as suffering moral and medical incapacitation. Some conservatives also accused presidential candidate Pat Buchanan of anti-Semitism.
The Congress of the United States is Israeli-occupied territory. What I meant by that is the most powerful lobby in Washington, which Congress can't stand up to.
In 1992, Buckley published a short book titled In Search of Anti-Semitism, addressing the Sobran and Buchanan controversies.
I find it impossible to defend Pat Buchanan whatever it was that drove him to say and do it, most probably an iconoclastic temperament. I still cannot find it in my heart to say that Pat Buchanan is personally anti-Semitic, but he definitely is politically so.
We should criticize racism and anti-Semitism when we see it, but Buckley's approach stifled debate on the topics of America's military and financial support of Israel. Because Israel depended on U.S. support for its existence, Buckley claimed that opposition to that support is anti-Semitic, which is wrong.
Is it de facto anti-Semitic to be anti the state of Israel? Isn't it possible to oppose Israel and yet still be free of the taint of anti-Semitism? That in the absence of definitive military aid by the United States, the probabilities are high that Israel would be extinguished. It would follow that any American president unwilling to support Israel militarily would be inviting the elimination of the Jewish state and its people.
And Buckley's indirectness didn't help. Sopron rightly called out his florid rhetoric as too often pure gesture with little meaning. Buckley left the conservative movement with an inexcusable moral confusion about the difference between real anti-Semitism and legitimate foreign policy disagreements. It explains why some conservatives are disingenuously branding Congressman Thomas Massie as an anti-Semite for his principled opposition to U.S. support for Israel or any other foreign country. And it explains Ben Shapiro's vilification of Ron Paul. Podcaster and comedian Dave Smith says that smearing foreign policy critics like Paul, instead of engaging with their arguments, helps explain figures like Fuentes.
You said that about Ron Paul? Then you know what, Ben Shapiro? You get Nick Fuentes.
There is no contemporary figure of Buckley's stature to gatekeep the right, and there's no gate to close. This leads to messier discourse, but ultimately we're better off. Plus, the villain's hand eventually grasped onto the side of the building, and today, Buckley's enemies have largely overtaken National Review conservatism. Trump's agenda looks a lot more like Buchanan's than Buckley's, and Fuentes is a critic of Israel and an anti-Semitic racist. Buckley sidelined former contributor Murray Rothbard at National Review over his non-interventionism, penning a snide obituary in which he called the libertarian economist a man of defective judgment who couldn't handle moral priorities. Had Buckley instead engaged with Rothbard's ideas about non-interventionism, the evils of central banking, and the corrupting impact of government money printing, the modern conservative movement would have been better off. With the same glee that AOC celebrated Tucker's deplatforming, Buckley exulted that Rothbard, upon his death, ended up with about as many disciples as David Koresh had in his little redoubt in Waco. Today, Rothbard's followers, including Dave Smith, have made him arguably more influential than Buckley. And as a libertarian, I'm happy to see Buchanan and Rothbard's case for non-interventionism taken more seriously. I simultaneously oppose the protectionist and anti-immigration sentiments along for the ride. But what if young conservatives are overexposed to Nick Fuentes, and the algorithms serve them nothing to counter him? Digital echo chambers are a familiar concept. But Timur Kuran worries also that modern media exposes us only to selective negative portrayals of the other.
This steady barrage of clips that show how terrible, how subhuman your opponents are. The things that will go viral in that network about the other side are things that fill you with outrage constantly.
On the right, this manifests in amplifying leftists who cheer the murder of Charlie Kirk, or school teachers who say outrageous things on TikTok as if they aren't outliers. This isn't anything new. William F. Buckley's biographer Sam Tannenhouse wrote that the trouble with the John Birch Society founder Robert Welch wasn't his actual influence, but his perceived influence. Liberals, especially liberals in the media, were taking him seriously, or at least pretending to, as a way of damaging them all. Fuentes is a similar cudgel against the right today, with the New York Times publishing 9 pieces over 3 months about him and the Groypers. And some of his popularity may actually be an illusion. One recent study of Fuentes' social media presence discovered a network of anonymous accounts quickly retweeting all of his content, implying manipulation by actors coordinating in unison. In the post-deplatforming world, Carlson and Smith are right that we can't simply ignore the intolerant movements like the Groypers and hope they go away.
I decided Nick Fuentes can't be canceled. They've been trying since he was a freshman in college. It doesn't work. In fact, he's gotten bigger. He's the most influential voice for men under 30 in the United States. More influential than me, more influential than you. I don't think there's any question about that.
Me and you did not move 1 inch on our views on what we've been saying the whole time. And in fact, look, when you said the thing to Fuentes about, hey, we're both Christians, like I went at it from more of a libertarian perspective and you from more of a Christian perspective, which makes sense. But I basically said to him at one point, like, you're telling me I say it's the Israel lobby and the Israeli government, but I'm not saying it's the Jews. Well, what do you mean? Let's talk about this. And he kind of conceded that, like, oh yeah, this doesn't apply to all Jews. And then when you said it to him, he kind of conceded, like, yes, I'm also a Christian who has that same worldview.
There are people that are legitimately hating Jews right now.
Yeah, there are.
I saw in Florida, they're pulling up on Jews with like water pistols and spraying them with water. And I got on my show and I said, fuck that.
Yeah,
I said,
and I appreciate that.
Yeah, because I don't believe in that. And to the extent that you're right, Jews were the biggest critics of the Iraq war. In many cases, yeah, there's liberal Jews, but they're liberal because that's a strategy for Jews to succeed. They have these debates. What is best for the Jews?
The remarkably low bar that Fuentes cleared was to say that people shouldn't attack Jews on the street and to concede that some Jewish people opposed the Iraq war that Israel supported, but only because appearing liberal was self-serving. Engaging with Nick Fuentes probably won't change his mind, and you can't deplatform it. One approach is to expose how immature and vapid provocateurs like Fuentes really are by simply reading their statements back to them, as Piers Morgan recently did.
What do you mean by Hitler is very fucking cool? Because I think he's very fucking a monster.
Okay. And that's a clip. I think he's very fucking a monster. Do you hear yourself?
Yeah,
I mean, can we all grow up?
I do.
Can we all grow up?
He murdered 12 million
childish.
people. He murdered 12 million people. What is very fucking cool about that? Tell me.
The edits, it's just cool. The uniforms, the parades, it's cool as a guy.
The best approach in the welcome absence of aggressive social media moderation is self-moderation. Edmund Burke, the leading philosopher of the conservative movement, called moderation the virtue only of superior minds in a letter critiquing the outcome of the bloody French Revolution. Moderation requires a deep courage, most especially when an unthinking public is pulled towards splendid and perilous extremes. To preserve our liberty in this unmoderated digital world, we must regularly calibrate our own attention chambers and beware the allure of perilous extremes. What are the private truths we dare not utter in the presence of the in-group? What are the public lies we repeat to impress? Are we exposing ourselves to the best arguments from the other side? Here's a tell. Is your favorite commentator constantly talking about what they want to do to you? Who is they?
You know, I always worried that it would come to this, that eventually they would start killing us.
I would love to tell people exactly why they want Trump dead.
They're conducting experiments to see how they can get you to believe in anything, how they can get you to not even believe your own eyes.
In the post-deplatforming world, it's easy to let an algorithm overserve us on what it's learned we like, which all too often is a disdain for them. Deplatforming doesn't work, so let's learn how to have real conversations and to defend our beliefs with reason, not by pointing out that the other side is so deplorably evil that the only recourse is to silence it by any means necessary.